The Murat Canal, Taldor, last week of summer, 4718. The night felt heavy with the weight of old secrets. The moon, a mere sliver in the black sky, casting only a few pale golden eddies across the dark waters of the canal. Demi stood at the tiller, her hand steady on the worn wood. Their thoughts wandered far from the narrow passage ahead. The sails were half full, catching a consistent westerly breeze that pushed the riverboat steadily onward with the lumbering, languid grace of an old beast. It was as Goethe had promised before they left. The blessings of Hans Spur would keep them moving, even on the stillest of nights. And tonight was such a night. The world was deathly silent, save for the gentle lapping of water against the hull, a sound that seemed to echo the turmoil in Demi's synthetic heart. As had become customary, the other members of her party had gone to sleep at night, but Demi had stayed awake, ever watchful, and guiding the boat while her living friends rested. Normally, Rodrigo, Aurelius's raven familiar, would keep her company at night, but somehow the bird had picked up on her mood, and it was flying overhead, keeping an eye out for trouble and leaving Demi alone with her thoughts. The mood of the last couple of weeks in Murat should have been celebratory. They had done everything they had set out to do. They had ousted the Count of Murat County and replaced him with their ally Nicolaus O'Cara, and in turn the new Count O'Cara had supported the ousting of Duke Mercator. Now their close ally, and the childhood friend of Princess Eutropia, Martella Lothede, had been named Duchess of the Duchy of Lathamir, and with their leadership as one of the high ladies of the prefecture, the Grand Duchess of the Tandak Prefecture, Lady Caesara Tiberan, had come out publicly in support of Princess Eutropia's claim to the title of Empress and Grand Princess. This had triggered a wave of public support across the north of the country. Various lords and ladies had come out publicly in support of the princess. So why was Demi feeling so down? Why had they all been feeling so down? Because of the words of one man, Panavar Lothede. In the final moments before their victory in Murat County, they had been approached by Martella's great-uncle, an immortal wizard, and one of the architects behind a secretive cult known as the Order of the Immaculate Circle. Panavar had not only laughed at their accomplishments, but was so overconfident he revealed to them his master plan, to resurrect Prince Carius and use this rightful heir to control the crown. The party had not yet explained all this to Martella, fearing that sending magic might not provide the secrecy required to discuss this in detail. So they had quietly wrapped up their work in Murat County over the last couple of weeks, handed the Palace of Birdsong over to the new Count O'Cara, while the old Count, Bartleby, was being held in O'Cara's private holding cells in Pinsaris. Then they arranged for Lady Lucrezia Marthane, now the Tribune of Newtown, to manage the Stakis barony, while Baron Aurelius and his company went to Tandak Prefecture's capital of Cassomir to meet with Lady Martella Lothede, Princess Eutropia, and Grand Duchess Tiberan, and discuss the next phase of their plans. The fastest way to Cassomir was by riverboat, and Baroness Voynam had been kind enough to lend them a two-masted river skiff for their journey. Demi sighed deeply. Alone under the cloak of night, she felt the vast emptiness of the world pressing in around her. It wasn't just Panavar's arrogant posturing that had bothered her. It was the words he had picked out for her specifically. The words echoed in her mind.
"You think yourself a formidable machine, don't you? Well, I'm afraid in time you will die, like any mortal woman of flesh and blood. The poison of Tishalas affects us all. 100 years. That is how long a soul encased in an android chassis typically endures."
Strange as it might seem to the humans, Demi didn't know this about herself. She had assumed that she was immortal, or close to it. She thought back to her earliest memories. Her synaptic records gave her near-perfect recall after all. It was close to the end of the year 4629, when she was dropped to her feet and experienced consciousness for the very first time. Her earliest memory was of sliding down the side of a rocky cliff face in the early dawn. The Numerian deserts grew very cold in the winter, and the sudden sensation of both falling, combined with a rush of cold after being ejected from the warmth of the mechanical womb that had fabricated her, was an unwelcome and overwhelming barrage of sensations. When she stopped falling, it took a minute for her to figure out how her limbs worked and how to pick herself up off the floor. She had barely had enough time to take a few tentative steps when the Kelids had found her. A brutish human creature wearing thick animal furs and accompanied by two equally mean-looking henchmen came down the ravine. A heavy, saw-toothed axe of roughly hammered steel was in his right hand. "There," he had declared. "I told you I saw it. One of the Star Children." Of course, she hadn't understood the language, called Halit, at the time, though she recognized it instinctively for what it was, the basic faculties of language she had been born with. "Help me. she said in her own pre-programmed Androphan language, and staggered forward on trembling legs. "I am new. I am lost." The man hefted his axe. "You are part of the great machine corruption," roared the man angrily in his guttural tongue. "The ruin of our world, brought to us from beyond the stars. The only thing the ghost wolves bring you today is the mercy of a quick death." Some instincts took over Demi. She shrieked at the top of her lungs, a high-pitched, magical cry. The three Khelids stumbled and collapsed. They were fast asleep. She didn't understand it yet, but it was her first time using bardic magic. To describe Demi's first decade of life as difficult would have been a tremendous understatement. Demi soon learned the android-hunting ghost wolves were the least threatening things in Numeria. The dreadful Technic League sought out androids to take them apart and put them back together, to reprogram them as slaves for their powerful cultish order. It didn't take her long to realize that the sooner she left Numeria, the safer she would be. She had been conscious for barely 11 years when she crossed Numeria's southern border. She reached the village of Moormouth, which at the time was a village in the river kingdom of Corvin. Of course, Corvin doesn't exist anymore, Demi thought idly. King Castruccio Iravetti conquered it and made it a part of the nation of Pitax in 4661. In any case, in Moormouth, Demi made the acquaintance of a historian and archaeologist from Taldor. His name was Arcturus de Vrain. He had been the first human who she had eventually opened up to and revealed her android nature to. He had been fascinated by her. Arcturus's area of specialization was Aslanti history, and he had become convinced that the Aslanti had had communication with other worlds. He believed that her people, the Androphans, had probably come to Galarian seeking out the Aslanti, perhaps to consult with them on their magical expertise. By the time the Androphans reached Galarian, however, the Aslanti had already been destroyed, eradicated by the cataclysmic meteor strike known as the Earthfall Cataclysm. Demi's friendship with Arcturus unfortunately didn't last that long. Arcturus didn't quite understand Demi's caution about her identity. He told a few too many people about her nature. Word of her crossed north into Numeria, and when Demi was 15, the Technic League raided the city of Moormouth, looking for her. Arcturus was killed, and Demi fled once again, traveling even further south, beyond the southern border of the River Kingdoms and into Galt. She had kept with her Arcturus's notebook, his collection of observations from his studies in Numeria and the River Kingdoms. The year was now 4645 when Demi crossed into Galt. At the time, Galt was a province of the Empire of Cheliax. It was only 5 years after the infernal House of Thrun had won the Chelish Civil War. The Galtish Revolution was still 20 years away, but anti-Thrun sentiment was strong in the country. Demi kept her head down and kept moving. The Hell Knights and the Church of Asmodeus were all too familiar. They were just like the Technic League in her own country, watchful overlords who imposed their own will on the people through the brutal application of force. She crossed into Taldor later that year, near the town of Tregan. Across the border, there were no more Hell Knights, or devil-worshipping clerics. Northern Taldor was beautiful. Vast forests, high mountains, rolling hills, and blue rivers. She remembered reaching the town of Skathen in 4646, a large North Tandak trade city on the Broken Bridge River, and she had sought out the local college. Somehow, it had become important for her to pass on Arcturus's research notes to someone that might put them to good use. At the Skathen Historical Institute, she had made the acquaintance of a handsome young man named Belorelli Falspar. Balor was a young lord of the prefecture, and passionate about Aslanti history, preparing to mount an expedition to the famous ruins of the Aslanti city of Pegador in the Kazan prefecture. Balor was ecstatic when Demi had shared Arcturus's notes with him, and he insisted that she join him on his expedition. Even as she set off with him on his expedition, Demi had no idea that Balor was the eldest son of the Grand Duke of the North Tandak Prefecture, and that he was destined to inherit this northern land. The two became fast friends as they explored the old ruins together. Demi's perfect recall and ability to rapidly parse the details of long-dead languages made her an invaluable ally at an archaeological dig site. Demi and Balor spent 2 years together, working with other explorers and academics in the ruins of Pegador. Even now, 70 years later, she remembered those 2 years as some of the best of her life. Then word came to Balor that his father had passed away. Balor needed to return home. His responsibility to the prefecture and to the family needed to come first. He needed to come home, get married, and start producing heirs. Demi returned to northern Tandak with Balor, and watched him get named Grand Duke Falspar of the North Tandak Prefecture by a white-robed priest of Abadar. She remembered with a flush of embarrassment at how Balor had worked up the courage to tell her that if she asked him to, he would happily disappoint his family by taking a foreign bride. He was indicating that he would make her the Lady of House Falspar. It was Demi's turn to share difficult words with him. She didn't explain the details, but she told him it would not work, as she could not have children with him. Balor had looked heavy with guilt and remorse. He then told her that he had no right to ask this of her, but he would like her to stay, to help him rule anyway, as an advisor perhaps, as an expert in history and culture, and all the other things she had shown him in their time together in the ruins of Pegador. It had been awkward at first, after Balor's wedding, a carefully arranged political marriage with a young lady from one of the great northern houses. Balor's new bride, Eloisa, had been a little jealous initially of the closeness between Balor and the strange pale woman who said little of her past, except to suggest that she had come from a place far to the north of Taldor. Then, after she started having babies, Eloisa's perspective on Demi began to shift. Demi loved the children as if they were her own. She was strong and utterly tireless, and there seemed to be no end to the wealth of knowledge that she could share with them. Eloisa found herself completely reliant on Demi's service over the years, entrusting all matters of childcare to her husband's advisor and friend. Over the next 20 years, Demi came to know the poison of Tishalas, as Panavarlo Thede had called it. Tishalas was one of the psychopomp ushers, the foremost servants of the goddess Pharasma. He is the lord of time, and his figurative venom is actually just the aging that all mortals must endure. Balor and Eloisa grew old together. The vitality of Balor faded before her eyes. Lordship made him more sedentary, and in his middle years he grew fatter and slower. Balor and Eloisa had 3 children, 2 boys and a girl. Demi watched them grow from tiny little helpless babes into young men and women. His eldest boy, Bartolomeo, was the spitting image of Balor when she had first met him, and he too was soon married. His was a less strategic union, a love match, a whirlwind romance that had occurred when Bartolomeo had been away at school. They had a single difficult pregnancy, producing a frail child, Breatisa Falspar, who was born in 4669. Balor would only know his granddaughter ever so briefly. A year later, when Balor himself was only 54 years of age, he caught a dreadful flu. He would not survive it. On his deathbed, Balor had made her promise to look after his family. "You were always there for me, to help guide me when I needed you," he had said to her when she visited him at his bedside in his final hours, even as he was riddled with illness. "Be there for my son as you were there for me, and for his children too. Please, Demi, you can be the immortal guardian of my line, watching over us, telling our stories down through the generations." "You don't even really know what I am," said Demi evasively. "I know that I love you, and I think you have loved me," coughed the dying man, "and that's enough for me. Promise me, please." "I promise," she said at last. "I'll keep your children safe." Then, no sooner had these words left her lips, and she could see that Balor had died, and in that moment Demi learned that even an android can cry. With Balor's death, Eloisa sank into a deep depression, and eventually left Falspar Keep to spend time with family of hers in Avon Prefecture. Demi kept her promise to Balor. Bartolomeo became Grand Duke. He was the one who started the habit of sending Demi to Apara during the Senate votes to stand in as proxy for him. He relied on her heavily on almost every decision. When Bartolomeo's wife passed suddenly and unexpectedly, Bartolomeo fell into a deep depression. He would never remarry, and he would never have any male children. In 4691, he informed his family he could no longer attend to the duties of the prefecture. He named his only daughter Breatisa to the position of Grand Duchess. Breatisa was 22 at the time of her ascension to the seat of the Grand Duchess, and not yet married. Demi continued to fulfill her promise to Balor, advising Breatisa that she would need to marry and have children, but also that she would need to marry beneath her, or her children would not take her name. Breatisa listened to Demi's advice, marrying a reputable knight, a war hero, with few lands and titles, but who would happily hyphenate his name, and give her superior name to their children. One thing Demi had learned about human society, or at least Taldan society, was that blood was an insufficient marker of privilege. One needed the right name as well, and the Falspars had a long and proud history. Though she had been born small, Breatisa had grown into a strong woman. She loved sport and hunting, and regularly sparred with her husband. From 4692 to 4696 she had 3 children, all girls, and finally, fed up with having children, she had told Demi that she would not keep trying for a boy. The most recent batch of young scions raised by Demi, Brienna, Miria, and Celine, were now 26, 24, and 21 respectively. It had now been over 4 months since she had seen the girls, the longest period of time she had ever been away in their lives, and while they continued to get older each year, Demi herself was apparently not aging, or so she had always believed. Demi was 88 years old, and turning 89 in the month of Neth this year. If Panavar was to be believed, and she could see no reason as to why he might be lying about this, then she may have no more than 11 or 12 years left of her life. The sinking feeling she was having, it wasn't just worry about the fate of Taldor, it was more personal. It was an existential dread. "I don't want to die," said Demi, not even realizing she had said the words aloud. Rodrigo cawed in agreement. This shook her from her reverie. "Hey, when did you get back here? I thought you were scouting for trouble," she said, and tickled the feathers under his beak. Rodrigo just bobbed his head and looked at her. "I guess I've had enough time alone with my thoughts. The sky is starting to look brighter, isn't it? It will be dawn soon, and the others will be waking up. Time enough for me to feel sorry for myself again tomorrow, right?" Rodrigo cawed again. The dawn came swiftly, and the others slowly but surely rose with the sun. Sleeping in the ship's deck were the core of the company, including Rodrigo's master, the wizard Aurelius, the half-orc brawler Marius, the reserved dark elf oracle Rankle, and the noble-born and generally jovial monk Diyanah. It was clear from the slow start they were having this morning that Demi had not been the only one wrestling with her thoughts that night. Diyanah was unusually cranky. He had been going through it perhaps more than any of them. That night that Demi had learned she was immortal too, Diyanah learned that he had been secretly hosting the disembodied spirit of Prince Marius for the last 16 years. "Hey, why don't we have any Domavoy on this damn boat?" he groaned. "I'm missing Blunk's bacon so much right now." It wasn't just the 5 of them that had come up on this little trip to Cassomir. First among them, when she had learned that they'd be heading to Cassomir on the Marat Canal, Goethe had insisted on joining. "I've been away from the waters of my god for too long," she had said. "Besides, with me on your boat, the water will always flow in the right direction for you, and your sails will always catch a breeze. The blessing of Hunspur will guarantee the favours of the waters." She had not been wrong. They had made good time, crossing the over 100 miles from Marat to Cassomir in less than 24 hours. The majority of that was covered while most of the party slept below decks. It seemed Goethe's blessing worked when she was awake or asleep. Demi now watched her stretch her limbs on the prow of the ship, and it was clear that Goethe was in the highest spirits of anyone in the party. Being on the river again agreed with her. The tributaries of the Selen, even the artificial ones, were where she felt closest to her peculiar drowned god. After Goethe convinced them to let her come with them, Lady Sepsinia Crabby was not far behind. It had been years since Sepsinia had left the quiet, simple countryside of Marat County, and emerging from the recent events surrounding her enchantment at the hands of the undead lovelorn Opilio, had granted her a new lease on life. She was eager to visit the city of Cassomir and witness the High Prefecture's court at Grand Duchess Tiberan's Palace. She was not the last to join. Finally, they had been joined by Anlel Oakleaf. The Druid had spent over a month assisting the town of Stakis with its various agricultural problems, and was overdue to return to her order, the Wildwood Lodge of Druids at the Isle of Arranway. If she continued by boat, Cassomir was on the way to the Isle of Arranway, which lay another 120 miles or so further up the river, where the Selen cut through the Verduran forest. Cassomir was the second largest city in Taldor, the great port at the mouth of the mighty Selen, the greatest river in all of Avestan. By way of the Selen, it was connected to Lake Incarthen and the Lake of Mists and Vales, the 2 largest lakes in all of Avestan. All the trade of the river kingdoms, and Brevoy, and of the Incarthen circuit flowed out from the port of Cassomir. On a daily basis, the mighty fort trafficked in the wealth of whole kingdoms. If Cassomir's vast taxes stayed in the Tandak prefecture, then it would surely be the wealthiest prefecture in all of Taldor. But Taldor was nothing if not hierarchical, and much of this wealth flowed directly to the Taldan crown. The incredible opulence of the capital of Opara was in part due to the success of the port of Cassomir. The canal widened. The water brightened, reflecting the sun overhead as it climbed higher into the sky. Before the break of midday, the high walls and stone towers of Cassomir appeared in the distance, their imposing silhouettes cutting through the morning mist. Beyond these walls and towers, rising higher than the fortifications, stood grand temples and municipal buildings, their white walls and bright green roofs gleaming like jewelry under the sun. The architecture spoke of Taldor's old grandeur, built in emulation of what the Taldans imagined the cities of lost Aslant might have been, sculpted of marble and jade, majestic and enduring, possessing an aura of ancient power. To Marius, it reminded him of Opara, and it made him think of home. To Demi, it reminded her of her travels with the young lord Balorelli Falspar, which now felt many lifetimes ago. "We've spent too long in the country," observed Marius quietly to Demi. "It'll be good to be in a real city once again." As the boat drifted into the bustling dock, the city of Cassomir revealed its full vibrancy. The air buzzed with the sound of merchants hawking their wares, sailors shouting orders, and the creaking of ships straining against their moorings. The party spotted the figure of the newly minted Duchess Martella Lothide standing at the edge of the pier. Goethe had taken command of the riverboat now, and she guided it to a careful stop at the designated spot. Martella was even more striking today than she had been at the Exaltation Day Gala. The promotion to Duchess seemed to agree with her. She wore a dark cloak that fluttered in the breeze. Her sharp eyes scanned them each as they stepped off the boat in turn. Before the appropriate introductions could be made to Goethe and Anlel, Martella's servants moved in with swift efficacy. They began unloading their sparse belongings and packing them into a carriage, their practiced hands making quick work of the task. "Welcome to Cassomir, my friends," said Martella, her voice smooth and measured. "And Sepsinia, it's delightful to see you too. The last time I was at the Palace of Birdsong, you couldn't have been more than 13, I'd think." Sepsinia curtsied for the Duchess. "You were always my favourite, Lothide," she said. "The title of Duchess really suits you." "Thank you," said Martella. "And I'm looking forward to meeting your other two friends in a moment too, but on the road, if possible." Martella gestured to one of her attendants, a large man in a red cap who seemed to be responsible for clearing the way for Martella's party. She indicated to follow him, and then kept pace with the party herself. She spoke as she walked. "We've arranged to stop at a tavern just outside the city walls. It's quiet, discreet. We'll have your belongings brought there as well. You made excellent time, so we'll have a whole afternoon to ourselves to catch up on everything in private before we go to the Tiberan Palace." With that, they followed the new Duchess's escort and her entourage through the throng. Marius seemed visibly crestfallen when he realized that no sooner had they arrived in the city of Cassomir that they'd be leaving it to spend time at yet another noble person's estate. The tavern was a modest, unassuming structure, nestled just beyond the city walls. From the outside it appeared little more than a weathered stone building with a thatched roof. Its age was betrayed by the moss creeping up the walls and the ivy that clung stubbornly to the stonework. A simple wooden sign swaying gently in the breeze bore the name The Whispering Willow. Inside the tavern was dimly lit, the air thick with the scent of wood smoke and aged oak. The common room was small but cozy, with low wooden beams that seemed to press down on the space, giving it an intimate, almost secretive atmosphere. A large hearth dominated one wall, its fire crackling softly, casting flickering shadows across the room. The furniture was sturdy and functional, with rough-hewn tables and benches arranged haphazardly around the hearth, their surfaces worn smooth by countless patrons over the years. The barkeep, an older man with a grizzled beard and kind eyes, moved with a slow, deliberate pace, as though the world outside held no sway over the peaceful rhythm of the tavern. Martella handed Sepsinia a pouch of coins, and encouraged her, Anlel, and Goethe to remain downstairs and get some lunch in the common area with the other members of her entourage, indicating that she wished to speak in private with her friends. Upstairs, Martella had taken the largest room at the tavern. It occupied the entire third floor, in fact, a big space with its own hearth and a large oak dining table in the center of the room. She took one of her noise-canceling clockwork crickets out of her pack and set it on the table. "Finally some privacy," she said at last, and stood up to address the party as they sat around the large dining table. "First, let me start by saying congratulations on your incredible, I would say even unbelievable work. I don't want to get overconfident, but I'm suddenly seeing some light at the end of the tunnel. Grand Duchess Tiberan has come out publicly in support of the princess's claim. So too have Grand Duchess Denzani of the Kazan Prefecture and Grand Duchess Falspar. Thank you for that one, Demi. Also, of course, Grand Duke Avanathus. Grand Duke Vobilar has claimed for Pytherius, but so far no one else has come forward and pledged their support to him. But our journey is far from over. Now let's talk about what comes next." Wait, Martella," said Aurelius. "Slow down. We haven't told you everything yet. There's a lot we need to tell you." Aurelius's interruption seemed to have pulled the wind from out of Martella's sails a little. It was clear she had rehearsed this little speech. "Something about my brother?" asked Martella nervously. "No, Bartleby is, he's fine, I guess," said Aurelius quickly. "He's currently being held by Count O'Kara's people, at least until the whole succession crisis is dealt with. We're just worried he might be a bit of a liability until then, so he's under lock and key." "Oh, good," said Martella, breathing an earnest sigh of relief. "I'm glad you were able to work it out bloodlessly. I'm afraid for my own part I was not." The party already knew this from O'Kara. There had been a vote in the capital, weapons had been drawn, and Duke Mercator had lost his life in the scuffle. "And how are you doing with that?" asked Marius. "Better than you'd expect, actually. Keeping my head in the mission helps. Also, it helps that he was a terrible father. I wonder if that's been a small reprieve for Princess Eutropia as well in these last few months. Maybe not. She's a little more sensitive than I am. It's not about Bartleby, continued Aurelius. It's about your uncle Panavar. Panavar? Asked Martella curiously. He died almost 15 years ago. No, he just walked out on your Aunt Valeto 15 years ago. Because soon people were going to clock to the fact that, oh, I don't know, he doesn't age at all. He's really alive. What's he got to do with all this? Where do we even start? Said Aurelius. Let's start with the fact that he's not really your uncle, said Diyanah. Ever notice in your portrait gallery that your Uncle Panavar looks suspiciously a lot like your great-uncle Prospero? I never met my great-uncle, and it's only a portrait, not exactly accurate. Plus, people do tend to look like their previous generations. Isn't that right, Demi? He showed up in person, said Demi, after we forced Bartleby out, and we were exploring the Palace of Birdsong. He taunted us. He told us we'd won a battle, but he'd win the war. I think, well, we think, your uncle is the puppet master behind Grand Strategos Pytherius' bid for the crown. The rest of this is no longer guesswork. He is a very powerful wizard, and he's somehow made himself immortal. He lived as Panavar and as Prospero before him. He may well have led other lives before that. We're not sure exactly how old he is, but very old. He cast a time-stop spell, added Aurelius. He froze us all in place and monologued at us for 10 minutes before the spell wore off. That's not just a wizard, that makes him one of the most powerful wizards in Taldor, and maybe in the Inner Sea. This is not a foe to be taken lightly. Martella sunk back into her chair. He is powerful, or rather, I knew him to be powerful in life. My father was a gifted arcanist, so was my brother Bartleby, though fortunately you never had the need to learn this for yourself. But Panavar was something else. He radiated power. I was only a child when he disappeared, but even then I could feel a collective sigh of relief from the rest of the family when he was gone. Martella drifted in her thoughts for a while. Then she asked, "What did he tell you?" "He started by talking about the Taldan factions," explained Aurelius. "He sarcastically complimented us on our success in the north. He did point out that Avon Prefecture was the glaring hole in our northern alliance so far. He's not wrong. Avon is a border province against the Kelishite-controlled Whistling Plains. Grand Duke Broyce Ranjana is something of a military man and a traditionalist. His politics would favor Pytherius. Panavar suggested Pytherius might be able to exploit this somehow and break the north." "That could be a clever misdirect," suggested Martella, "to make us look left when he's moving to the right." "I don't think so," observed Demi. "He was coming from a place of pride. He wanted us to know how hopeless the fight was. He relishes the competition. He laid his plans out on the table because he knew we'd be incapable of stopping him." "Then his overconfidence will be his downfall," suggested Rankle. "You weren't there," said Demi. "That's exactly what encourages me," said the Dark Elf. "He thinks he sees everything, but he doesn't. His arrogance blinds him. You remember on the first night we spent in the Palace of Birdsong, whatever servant he had observing our dreams studied Aurelius and Diyanah, but not Marius and I. The second night you spent at the Palace of Birdsong, he studied Marius, but frankly, only because Marius was the only one of us who spent the night there. In our final encounter, he waited for Gerda and Sepsinia and I to separate from the group to present himself to you. That means he still thinks I'm humble Willem of Elber Creek. He showed himself to the people that, quote-unquote, matter, and only the people that matter, because he doesn't see anyone else." Look, I'm glad he doesn't know we have a Fey Oracle in the wings, and I take your point that we might be able to surprise him somehow, but honestly, a wizard this powerful, Aurelius sighed. Maybe I think too highly of the arcane arts, but this is an enemy that has every right to be overconfident. There are few forces in the Inner Sea that can really threaten such a wizard. He's already overcome death. His servants can invade our dreams. Who knows what other powers he can draw on? "You haven't even told her the worst part yet," said Diyanah. "There's more?" asked Martella. Yeah," said Aurelius. "There's another important thing we've been dancing around. Here goes. 20 years ago, Eutropia's brother Carius fell from his horse. His father called for clerics, and when they struggled to bring him back, they called for experts in other esoteric arts, among them masters of the arcane, including your Uncle Panavar." "I know all this. I was there," noted Martella. "Eutropia and I were already in school together and close friends, so I was in Opara with Eutropia at the time. It was a harrowing experience for her. I was in the room, in fact, and I remember Panavar telling Grand Prince Stavian that his son was beyond saving. His soul was missing, and it could not be retrieved." "Well, then it's probably not a surprise, given what we just said, that Carius' soul was not missing. It was stolen. Stolen by Panavar." Martella audibly gasped. And there's more," said Diyanah, and he shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Around the same time all that was happening in the palace, I was abducted. I don't remember much about my kidnappers, but a week or two later they released me back to my home. And then, weird stuff would happen after that. I'd get irrationally angry, especially when I saw drawn circles or patterns with circles. Eventually, my dad sent me to the Temple of Irori to build some better anger management tools. Anyway, Panavar revealed to me that it was never my anger. My whole life has been a lie. It was his cult that had abducted, and, well, I guess they put Carius' soul into me? They buried it in my subconscious? I've been the host for the last 20 years of a rage-filled prince's spirit that died before his time was up. Diyanah shook slightly as he said this. Demi looked over to him. She had been so wrapped up in her own worries the last few weeks that she had not appreciated what a toll these events had taken on Diyanah. She put a hand on his shoulder. "Yeah, I'll take it from here," said Aurelius. So then Panavar pulled the soul from Diyanah's body and placed it in a poppet. He left with Carius' soul. Before he left, though, he said he was going to bring him back to life, and with the rightful heir to the country, could rally the nation behind whomever he supported, in this case Pythaeus, at least until the true king would come of age. Martella just sat there, sitting slack-jawed and dumbfounded. "That's everything," said Marius. You were going to tell us what comes next in your plan." "I have no contingencies for this," she said simply. "It's not like you to not know what to do next," said Rankle. "I need a minute to think," she said, and she stood up and paced back and forth for a moment. "First things first," she said, thinking aloud. "We do not breathe a word of this to Utopia. She's dealing with enough difficult things at the moment without having to worry about someone trying to resurrect her brother. It could break her, and we need her to be strong right now, and to focus on her leadership and the war for the crown." "We are seeing her this evening," said Marius. "You expect us to lie to her?" "Not to lie, just to omit certain details. In fact, don't mention my uncle at all. The mission in Marat was a total success. You ousted my brother, you gave it to our ally Okera, so we were able to secure the duchy and the prefecture. End of story." "Seems like we're leaving a lot out," said Marius. Martella shook her hands at Marius. "Just think for a moment. To win in Tandak Prefecture, we had to imprison my brother and kill my father. When she learns my uncle, or my great-uncle, or whatever he is against us as well, how long will she trust a Lothid in her inner circle? How long before her suspicion turns to me? I can't protect her if she doesn't trust me." Martella's normally confident exterior had fully cracked before them. She was vulnerable and scared, and it made Marius uncomfortable. Fine, he said. "We won't say anything to Utopia." Martella breathed a sigh of relief. "And what do we do next?" asked Rankle. "I honestly don't know anymore," said Martella. Demi spoke up. "We go to Avon Prefecture. We go to Yanmas." Aurelius raised an eyebrow at her. "Because Panavar told us we were weak there. Are you sure about that?" "I'm the only one here who knows what it's like to think they're immortal. I have been guilty of overconfidence myself in the past. He wants us to know what he's going to do next. He wants us to feel the inevitability of it. The Immaculate Circle will be in Yanmas. If we want to stop whatever he's planning next, that's where we should go." Martella shrugged. "You all know better than me at this point. All of the North has rallied behind her except the Avon Prefecture, so you're going north to plug that hole. That's all. No talk of my uncle or her brother. Clear?" The party nodded their acquiescence. Martella turned off the cricket and went to pull a signal rope by the door. Some of Martella's servants brought food up to the room, cold meats and breads, but Martella did not stay and eat with them. She said she needed to stretch her legs before the ride to the Tiberan Palace. Rankle went with her to keep her company and catch up privately. They made sandwiches and ate hungrily at first. Then Aurelius pulled his friend Diyanah to one end of the table. "We haven't really talked about how you're doing since the whole Panavar thing happened," said the wizard to the monk. "You haven't been yourself lately." "Give me time. I'll be fine," sighed Diyanah. "It's a strange feeling, to think your whole life has been defined by something so completely out of your control. Look here." He pulled the chain at his neck and showed the symbol on the talisman at the end of it, an open-faced palm. "I carry the symbol of a god that I went to control an anger that wasn't even mine to begin with. Who am I?" "You're my friend, and you have great taste in wine," said Aurelius, and he clinked Diyanah's glass. Diyanah smiled back at him, feeling a little cheered up. At the other end of the table, Demi and Marius were sharing similar words. "Hey, Demi," said Marius. "I noticed just now you said you thought you were immortal once. You've been stewing on Panavar's words, haven't you?" "Yeah, I guess I have," said Demi. "It's stupid, maybe. Just an existential crisis. I've seen many humans go through them. Many of whom I've had a hand in raising myself. Just never thought I'd have one too." "You don't know if he was telling the truth," said Marius. "I don't think he had any reason to lie," grumbled Demi. 2 weeks ago I thought I'd live forever. Now I think I only have 10 good years left. They'll be over in the blink of an eye. What have I even done with my life?" Marius laughed. "You've done everything.
You've raised 3 generations of false-bars, mightiest noble house of the north, from all I hear. You fought Kelid barbarians, traveled the river kingdoms, shaped the future of Taldor as a voting member of the Senate. You know everything there is to know about everything. You're an expert markswoman, and you carry a 3,000-year-old crossbow used by ancient heroes. You're kind of amazing.
Demi smiled at him. Thank you so much, Marius. That actually does make me feel much better.
I should have spoken to you sooner about all this, said Marius. I guess I've been so wrapped up in my own thoughts, I didn't check in to see how everyone else was doing.
Demi tilted her head at him. What's going on with you? Something Panavar said is troubling you?
Oh, no, said Marius. It's something else.
Come on, said Demi. Out with it. You made me share. Your turn to unburden.
Okay, very well. Remember when I went down to the lake with Lucrezia and I met the Swan Maid of Marat?
Of course.
Well, Lucrezia said something to me on the way back. Something to the effect of how it wasn't right that Bartleby had preyed on his people and he'd be allowed to go free. That she might just take justice into her own hands.
Marius looked up at Demi, but she wasn't saying anything, just listening, so he went on.
Well, I basically said that was between her and him. Ever since then, I've been worried. Bartleby isn't well protected, and we know she'll kill for vengeance. We just told Martella that her brother survived, but I'm not sure he will. Before long, they'll find him dead in his cell, and the Night Swan will leave her mark there. And I've been wrestling with this the whole time, and I didn't say anything to all of you, and I didn't say anything to Martella just now, and the worst part is that before we left Marat, Martella pulled me aside and walked with me in the garden, and said she needed me to be the heart of our party. She was insinuating I had some kind of moral fortitude, but I don't feel that way. I keep making the wrong decisions, and other people will pay the consequences.
Demi put a hand on Marius's shoulder. You don't need to worry about all that, Marius. Here, let me show you something. She called over to Diyanah and Aurelius on the other side of the table. Marius visibly winced, unsure as to what she might say to them. Hey, Diyanah, Aurelius, quick show of hands. Would either of you lose any sleep if something happened to Bartleby Lothede in prison? Neither raised their hand. That guy was an asshole, said Diyanah. Demi looked back at Marius. See? Just the fact that you're worried about what happens to Bartleby means you're still the best of us. Ha! Laughed Marius awkwardly, not fully convinced. The door opened and Rankle came in.
Come on, everyone. Lunchtime is over. Time for another fancy party at a fancy palace.
More of Martella's servants came in, and they washed them and dressed them for the evening gala. Marius looked over the clothes Martella had picked out for him, even more distinguished than those he had worn on the Exaltation Day gala. Glancing back at the table, he could see that Coriana's blade had transformed from gauntlet to elegant longsword, as if it also knew how to present well in public. Marius sheathed it at his side, and peace-bound it, as was the custom at Talden events. He looked over at everyone. They all looked great in their new finery, and both Anlel and Goethe actually cleaned up well, although Goethe looked exceedingly uncomfortable in the dress that Martella's seamstresses had put her in. A road from Cassomir to the country, Taldor, last week of summer, 4718. The carriage rattled along the well-tended road, the sound of hooves striking cobblestones echoing through the countryside. Rankle had taken the guise of Willem and was in the driver's seat, while inside the companions Aurelius, Demi, Marius, and Diyanah were each riding quietly, lost in their own thoughts, as the city of Cassomir receded behind them. The landscape changed as they traveled, the urban sprawl giving way to sprawling estates and manicured gardens. Soon the carriage turned into a long winding drive, flanked by tall hedges, each trimmed to perfection. Beyond them they caught glimpses of the estate's gardens, vast expanses of green dotted with vibrant bursts of flowers, intricate topiaries and marble statues that seemed to watch their arrival with stony indifference. As they rounded the final bend, the estate itself came into view. For Marius, he realized, it didn't matter how many fine homes he looked upon, the grandeur of each one seemed to take his breath away. The home of Grand Duchess Caesara Tiberan, High Lady of the Tandak Prefecture, was a testament to opulence, with tall white columns supporting a facade adorned with intricate carvings and accents of gilded filigree. Broad steps led up to an imposing set of double doors, which were flanked by ornamental urns overflowing with exotic plants. The windows were tall and arched, each framed by rich draperies of Talden teal trimmed in Tandak red. The carriage came to a halt, and liveried footmen quickly appeared to open the doors, bowing as the companions stepped down. From her own carriage, Duchess Martella Lothede also stepped out to join them. The air was rich with the scent of blooming roses and freshly cut grass, and echoing from within the mansion came the distant hum of conversation. Inside, the mansion was no less impressive. The entry hall was vast, its marble floors polished to a mirror-like sheen, reflecting the light from a massive crystal chandelier that hung from the ceiling. The walls were lined with tapestries and portraits of stern-faced ancestors. No portraits of the previous Grand Duke Bosbelly could be seen among them, however. They had all been taken down by Duchess Tiberan after he had been lynched by the mob in Cassomir for his lies and corruption. She had since taken every step to distance herself from her predecessor, except, it seemed, to tone down the extravagance of her own lifestyle. In the grand salon they were met by a gathering of lords and ladies, their fine garments and jewelled adornments marking them as the elite of the land. Conversations hushed as the companions entered. The crowd seemed to part, revealing Princess Eutropia Stavian and Grand Duchess Caesara Tiberan, who stood together at the end of the crowd. "Grand Duchess," said Eutropia to the woman standing beside her, "these are Martella Lotheed's companions, who helped turn the sentiment of the country towards you and helped support your new position on the succession. They really made all of this possible. Baron Aurelius Betanos, the new Baron of the Stachys Barony, the Lady Demetria, who serves as Senate proxy for the Falspar family, Lord Diyanah of House Frascati, a notable house from the Sofra prefecture, famous for their fine wines, and the loyal friend Marius from the White Marches." She didn't introduce Willem, the valet, who stood quietly behind the rest of the party. The Grand Duchess shook each of their hands in turn, even common-born Marius, and spoke with a little each in turn. She thanked them for their ousting of Count Bartleby, and told them that she had spoken at length with Count O'Cara when Martella had brought him to the Tiberan Palace 2 weeks ago to discuss Martella's appointment to the seat of the Duchy of Lathamir. She found him to be a good and reasonable man, and that they had chosen well in entrusting Marat County to him. The early parts of the evening were meet and greets with various important peoples from across Tandak Prefecture and a few adjoining prefectures who had come to celebrate the fact that so many of the northern prefectures had staked their support for Princess Eutropia. Everyone present was either a Eutropia-supporting loyalist, or good at pretending to be such. The spirits were generally high, and the mood was celebratory. The companions did their best to match moods with the crowd. Princess Eutropia proved herself to possess a pretty keen insight, however. In this early part of the event, she pulled Diyanah aside, and asked him what was on his mind. "Why, what do you mean?" asked the young lord of House Frascati. "Only that the last time we met you made me promise you a seat in the Senate. And you offered me no fewer than, I think, 5 casks of your family's best wine. You seem unusually quiet when I'd expect you to be celebratory." "Oh my goodness," said Diyanah in a sudden expression of faux surprise. "You haven't had any of my wine tonight. Let me fix that at once." He flipped open his shoulder bag. "Now, this bag may look like a simple satchel, but it came from a magic gremlin we defeated in the Senate underlevels. That was a whole crazy adventure. A Monticello gremlin. And let me tell you something cool about those gremlins. They always have a magic bag, where the inside space is bigger than the outside. So now," and he pulled out a whole bottle of Frascati Red, "I don't go anywhere without a few bottles of the good stuff." He called over a servant at once, and poured out 2 glasses, one for himself and one for the princess. "There we go. Let it never be said that a Frascati would forget to offer a lady her wine," he said as he clinked glasses with the princess. "This is who I remember from the gala. Still, there's something on your mind. Penny for your thoughts?" Diyanah wrestled with this a little bit. They had all promised Martella they wouldn't share the details of their final encounter in Marat with the princess. Diyanah swallowed slightly. Honestly, it's just I've been thinking a lot about my friend Marius. Well, you see, in Marat, in order, to make friends and influence people, we all had to pretend that he was a knight. Sir Marius, we called him. And now he's back here, and he's back to being a commoner again, and he's, well, I think he's more than that. He's one of the companions, "Oh dear," said Eutropia, a hint of faux shock in her voice. "Is Lord Frascati suddenly finding himself concerned with the great inequities of Taldor?" "Yeah, I guess so," said Diyanah. He swirled the wine in his glass and took a sip. "I hope to change some of that, don't you?" she said. "But it won't be easy. Change in Taldor comes slowly. And after all, who would wish to give up all this?" She indicated the magnificent estate, and all the fancy lords and ladies in their fine evening jackets and beautiful gowns. "Yeah, I'm not saying I became a bleeding heart in Marat," said Diyanah stiffly. "I wasn't thinking all the lords of Taldor should suddenly give up all their homes and titles. Just that maybe, you could knight Marius for real. You have that power, don't you?" "Of course," said Eutropia. "It's the least I can do. Tell him to come speak to me when he has a moment." Diyanah thanked her and excused himself. Then he made his way over to where Marius and Demi were speaking with a short but loud woman, wearing a funny set of iron spectacles. "Oh, Diyanah, come over here," said Demi, waving him over. "This is Lady Hestia Themis. She is the venture captain of the Cassomir Lodge of the Pathfinder Society, the same group that helped Lady Marilla during the Exaltation Day massacre. It seems the whole society has come out in support of the princess over the last few weeks." Right, said Diyanah. Aren't you guys all explorers and archaeologists and stuff? Oh, we're much more than that, said Lady Themis. We catalogue our world's history, we protect it and learn from it, and ensure that the mistakes of the past don't get repeated in the future. We can be quite politically active. Diyanah nodded. He wasn't interested in this conversation, he just wanted to collect Marius. How does one become a member of the Pathfinder Society? Asked Demi curiously. Well, we have a special school in Absalom, she said. We attract the greatest minds from across the world, and after learning our methods and performing a few special field missions, you gain membership in the society. Demi furrowed her brow slightly. That seems like a lot of work. Well, it's possible, though rare, to receive what's called a field commission. This allows for unaffiliated but accomplished explorers to skip this training, qualifying for membership through their past deeds alone. To qualify, one must have made some pretty remarkable discoveries, though, said the fastidious Lady Themis. Have you ever heard of the Aslanti writings of Arcturus de Vrain? Of course. Some foundational theories were established by him. They were published by a school in Skaden over 50 years ago. It was over 70 years ago, said Demi. I know because I brought them the journal. Lady Themis's eyes widened visibly. Sounds like the two of you have a lot to catch up on, said Diyanah. I'm just going to grab Marius here and leave you to it. Demi's voice faded behind them as she was saying to the Pathfinder venture captain, Tell me, Miss Themis, what do you know about the Aslanti ruins of Pegador? As soon as they were out of earshot of the other two, Marius asked Diyanah what was going on. Nothing secret here, just letting you know that the princess wants to speak with you, explained Diyanah.
I see, said Marius. Sorry, I must admit I was hoping I could get through the day without actually having to lie to her.
Oh, she won't ask about Marat or any of that, said Diyanah. Trust me, you want to go speak with her when you have the chance.
Marius shrugged. I'll head over now, I suppose.
Not surprisingly, Marius found Princess Eutropia surrounded by the other lords and ladies of the land, eager for a chance to converse with her. She spotted Marius coming through, though, and she dismissed them so she could have a word in private with her friend. It seemed clear to Marius that a few seemed slightly put off that Eutropia had prioritized a Half-Orc commoner over them, even though they tried not to show it.
Hi, said Marius. Your Majesty? Or is it Your Grace? Sorry, I'm nervous for some reason. Diyanah said you wanted to speak to me?
Indeed, said the princess. He tells me that you are deserving of a real knighthood. Marius seemed stunned.
Really? He said that?
Princess Eutropia smiled. Yes, he did. Would that please you? Marius stuttered slightly.
I would never dare to ask for such a thing, he said.
No, I don't imagine you would, but Diyanah dared to on your behalf. And that wasn't the question I asked. The question I asked was, would it please you? Marius shuffled awkwardly, and his skin went a darker shade of green.
Well, yes. Yes, I suppose it would.
Then it will be arranged, she said simply.
How would that work? Asked Marius.
We'd hold a little ceremony. We could do it right here. I'd read off a list of your accomplishments, and I'd knight you. You do have a list of accomplishments, don't you?
I don't know. What kind of accomplishments are we talking about?
Well, I hear you helped the people of Stackis quite a bit.
Oh, yes, I did. I slew the Faceless Queen. She was the ruler of a den of ghouls that had taken the old Stackis pump house. And also a manticore, and a wyvern, too. Well, not just me, all of us were working together. Oh, and also we rooted out a pack of werewolves from Soto.
And I hear that Aurelius has entrusted the legendary Coriana's blade to you, which was once used to slay the dragon Orthomirax during the dragon plague. Marius's hand went to the grip of the sword, and he fingered the 5 lustrous gemstones on the pommel.
That's true as well. It's a remarkable weapon. My life really has turned upside down of late.
You are a knight if I ever saw one, said Princess Eutropia. What do you think? Could you put together a list of deeds? Maybe a speech for me to read to recognize you for all your good works for the realm?
Oh, yes, Princess, he replied. But it wouldn't be right away. I'd need time to, do justice to your voice.
Of course. Whenever you're ready, then, said Eutropia. Marius offered her a bow and stumbled back into the crowd. He felt a strange mix of emotions, and he somehow wanted to both pummel and thank Diyanah at the same time. By the late hours of the night, most of the guests left for their own homes, or retired to guest chambers if they had come from far away, leaving behind Eutropia, Martella, Grand Duchess Tiberan, and the party from Marat to gather. Though it was late and they were tired, and most of the party had not slept that well the previous night on the boat, they still had much to discuss. They assembled in a room which the Grand Duchess called the War Room, a circular chamber dominated by a large, equally circular mahogany table, upon which was laid out another map of Taldor with various pins in it. When they gathered, Aurelius took the lead for the party here. Princess, my companions and I have been discussing, and we think our work in Marat is done. For the time being, care of the barony has been passed to the tribune of Newtown, Lady Lucrezia Marthane, and she is well versed in matters of barony and county leadership. So where do you think you and your friend's many talents could be put to the most use then? Asked the princess. We were thinking about Avon Prefecture. Grand Duke Broyce Rangiana has not yet declared his support for you. He has traditionalist leanings, but we think we could persuade him to claim for you if we went there. Princess Eutropia nodded seriously. I've been worried about Avon Prefecture as well. While Martella and I sent you all to Marat County, I sent an agent of mine to Yanmas as well. That was over 8 weeks ago. His name is Sir Mayor Dratovis. He was checking in with me periodically. His last correspondence mentioned troubling recent events, bandit raids, missing soldiers, and some kind of malady of a psychic nature that has been affecting some of the citizenry. He was working to address the problems, but I haven't heard anything in 3 weeks. That's not in his nature, so I already suspect some foul play. This plan is therefore already to my liking. I would very much like someone to check up on him. How much do you know about Yanmas in general? It's quite close to northern Tandak, said Demi. I've had occasion to visit the eastern city with Lady Falspar on occasion. Then you know that Yanmas isn't governed like a normal barony, and doesn't always answer directly to the Grand Duke. Demi nodded. The city does have a baron. His name is Baron Moston Custios, if I recall correctly, but the elderly baron is effectively an ambassador. He defers all civil administration to the city's mercantile council, a group of aristocratic traders whose specific numbers vary, but currently consists of 5 principal council members and 14 associate members. The mercantile council is very powerful, and not just in Yanmas, but across the Avon Prefecture, and their collective wealth means they can help influence the position of the Grand Duke Broyce Rangiana. Am I right so far? The princess smiled broadly. Yes, exactly. I wish I'd known how experienced you were in these matters, Demi. I'd have asked for you to go there instead of Dratovis. You already seem to understand the many nuances of the Avon Prefecture. The other advantage to trying to work with a mercantile council, rather than with the Grand Duke, is they're all social climbers, more open to reform, and more likely to support our cause than Pytherius is. Rangiana has been a friend to Pytherius over the years, is close to the military, and is likely to support the Grand Strategos. So yes, the Mercantile Council is the group I had sent Sir Dratovis to influence. Martella weighed in. I like this too. If we are sending Baron Aurelius and his party to Yanmas, and we know they're dealing with bandits, raiders, and missing soldiers, maybe we should send them as a formal delegation. Aurelius is a baron from the Tandak Prefecture, which has already sworn itself to the princess. We could do this with a little less subterfuge than we did last time. You could go with a specific intent of winning over hearts and minds, and solving Yanmas's problems in the name of the princess. That could work, said Aurelius, although we found in Marat there was something of an advantage in being a little covert. Martella furrowed her brow. I should add that my spies have informed me that Pytherius has sent agents of his own to fix the problems in Yanmas. If that's true, the subtle approach may not work to great advantage here. His agents might end up trying to take credit for the work you do. Yeah, they may also try to kill us if they know who we are, observed Aurelius. That's probably what happened to your other agent. May I suggest a two-pronged approach, then? You can move in public, suggested Rankle, and yet keep the true extent of your strength hidden from view. The Grand Duchess Tiberan's eyes widened when Aurelius's quiet valet spoke for the first time. Like all other Taldan nobles, she had not even acknowledged his presence. Both Eutropia and Martella, of course, seemed unsurprised by the valet having a point of view, so the Grand Duchess quickly swallowed her surprise and simply paid attention. That's true, agreed Diyanah, and then he flexed his muscles. And I don't know what Sir Dratovis was bringing to the table, but Pytherius's goons will have a much harder time with Marius and I can promise you that. Aurelius almost said to Diyanah that it wasn't Pytherius's agents he was worried about, but a certain 100-year-old wizard, but he bit his tongue, though, realizing he couldn't say that in front of the princess. Fine, said Aurelius. Let it be known that the Betnos delegation is coming to Yanmas on behalf of the princess to lend aid to the city in their time of need. We should leave tomorrow morning. It sounds like there's no time to waste. They agreed to call it a night shortly after that. In the palace Tiberan guest quarters, they had Rankle cast a sending spell to Baroness Voynam, apologizing to her that they would be using the riverboat for a little while longer, but promising to return it after their visit to Yanmas. They also informed Lady Lucrezia Marthane by the same method that she was going to have to serve as acting Baroness of Stakis for a little while longer as well. End of chapter.
And thank you so much for watching. You've just watched Season 3, Episode 1 of my Pathfinder 616 War for the Crown series. We are just kicking off our brand new adventure, a whole new season of War for the Crown. We are starting this book This book is The Twilight Child, the third book in the Adventure Path series. This is a really fun one. It's a little less sandboxy than the one we just went through. It's a little more linear in terms of its structure, but as we'll see over the course of this adventure, my players definitely don't stick to the normal sort of linear path. We kind of go in some interesting and different directions, and as we continue to deviate from the storyline as written, I'll continue to explain it here in my GM Aftermath, and I'll continue to explain some of the decisions that I made. One of the first differences, I think, is that instead of just jumping into the next mission, the way that the book is kind of structured is Martella shows up, she's like, your next assignment is that you go to Yanmas, here are the different things that you've got to solve. I decided that I want to pace that. I thought that this was a good opportunity for us all to take a breather, take a little bit of downtime, do some role-playing stuff, and so that's one of the reasons why there's a bit of an emphasis on the journey from Marat County to Yanmas, which actually will take up the majority of the next 2 episodes. This episode takes us on our journey down to Cassomir, and then the next episode will take us on our journey up to Yanmas. The other obviously fun thing is I like to weave in the events of the story with character backstory. So obviously we're going to the Avon Prefecture. The Avon Prefecture is right near northern Tandak. This seemed like a really good opportunity for us to explore some of Demi's backstory because of course she is in service to the Falspars, who are the High Lords of the northern Tandak Prefecture. I knew this would be an opportunity to drop some of that in here. So in terms of the structure of the episode that you've just watched, it's basically 3 events, one of which is we finally get a look at Demi's backstory. Some of that stuff will be important in the episodes to come. The second is we have an encounter with Martella Lothide, and the party kind of gets to explain all of the things that happened to them. And the third is that we have a meeting with Princess Eutropia and kind of a social encounter at the Palace Tiberan, and an opportunity to get some of the facts that I think the adventure wants you to set up. What's going on in Yanmas, who are the key players, who will they have to influence, and what are the key problems to solve over there. So let me jump into the second piece of this, which is that conversation with Martella. This I think was structurally different in my game from the dynamic is different in my game than the dynamic as described in the book. In the book, the players are agents of Martella's, and she is basically giving them assignments, and then they go and do the assignment. And I've talked about this in previous GM Aftermaths. That was not the dynamic that was developing in my game. In my game, my players were much more in command of their decisions. Now, ultimately, the decisions they make are still in service to the plot, partly because that's something that I encourage in my players, but also because I think they were just the types of PCs that if I fed them kind of the breadcrumbs, they would connect the dots by themselves. So in this particular case, I'd sort of seeded this idea that the Avon Prefecture was a vulnerability of theirs, and they actually brought that of their own initiative to Martella. So in kind of my version of events, Martella's actually, for the first time, at a bit of a loss. Martella does not know that the Immaculate Circle is trying to resurrect Prince Carius. So this comes as a surprise when the players report it to her. And I think that's a fundamental difference in terms of the whole storyline. And we'll see that difference actually has more and more impact as the story goes on. But they bring this information to Martella. She's at a loss of what to do. And it's the players themselves that ultimately say, we should go to the Avon Prefecture and solve Yanmas's problems. And Demi in particular is the one that said, I think that's where they're going to try to resurrect Prince Carius. So all of that I thought was really cool. And then the second part, the Palace Tiberan, that was a traditional social encounter with a bunch of characters that don't necessarily feature in this video, but I figured might have some political sway somewhere down the line, so we'll see if some of that pays off. We meet, obviously, one of the venture captains of the local Cassomir Lodge of the Pathfinder Society. And there's a few other characters that I think didn't quite make the cut in terms of the retelling. But essentially that whole meeting at the Palace Tiberan is an opportunity for Eutropia to lay out some of the challenges that Yanmas is facing. The Plague of Dreams, the missing cavalry regiments, the increased banditry, and some of those issues that we'll have to solve, or my players will have to solve, over the course of this chapter.
That's pretty much all I got for you today. Hope you enjoyed this one. More coming at you the week after next. See you next time.